Cassette 12, first side, Spiritual Development. The title of this cassette epitomizes the whole vast and marvelous process about which esoteric science tells us, and which we have reviewed in outline only on the previous cassettes. The whole story comes to a focus and terminates here. The two words of the title describe in themselves what the universe is doing. It is unfolding the potentialities of spirit. In its infinitudes of extent, depth, and variety, of its multitudinous powers and qualities, that is what the universe is doing. Our humanity is a critical stage in the process. Humanity is the point where, in the unimaginably long and intricate process, life becomes self-conscious. Life, as the monad, has passed through the stages of virtual unconsciousness in all the forms of being in the lower kingdoms. It has passed up gradually through the animal kingdom to be able to be aware of its environment, until in the higher animals it is aware of its feelings. In the human kingdom, by the link of intelligence or mind, it has conjoined itself as spirit to itself as matter and become self-conscious. It is perhaps too easy to make such a statement and to think that in saying it we really know what we have said. Maybe in a sense we do, but we must not forget the infinite scope of the fields of experience and growth, of effort, of suffering, in untold millions and millions of ways throughout millions of years in measureless space that have preceded this culmination. Such, however, is the marvelous mystery of being, that there is no place and no time when the all did not and does not exist in the tiniest thing or point in space as well as in the largest, equally at any instant in time. Such is monad, manifesting in the countless hosts of lives in its universe, whatever we may mean by that, at whatever developmental stage they are. And they are all developing all the time throughout the duration of cosmos. This progressive development is, as we have seen, by cycles within cycles, endlessly. Universes come and go, bringing with them whole tides of life, each wave of which, as well as coming and going itself, moves further up the beach, so to speak, than its predecessors when the tide is coming in, and falls away further and further from the high tide mark during the ebb. As any mathematician knows, no ocean wave is simple. It is composed of many waves. There is, for example, the great rolling swell, itself composed of lesser waves, and on their surface little wavelets blown up by local gusts of wind. Superimposed on the daily tides are the rhythmic lunar seasonal influences, and so life, in its endless variety of form, everlastingly ebbs and flows, its majestic rhythms disturbed maybe periodically by a storm, followed by a calm. Always, all the time, the law regulates the process, restores harmony and balance. It must be noticed, however, that it doesn't prevent the storms. They are, too, within its ambit. No simile could cover every aspect of the universal process of ever becoming, but this one, with some support from our imagination, can give us the feel of the great pulse of nature, with its countless secondary pulses. All the pulses, as with our own, taking place in in fact being part of, bodies which are born, mature, and die. Nothing escapes that, except the ever-enduring life, learning and growing through the interminable refining processes to which its vehicles are submitted all the time. Such concepts as these, with all the justifications for them that have been given in the previous cassettes, enable us to sense the cosmic process in ourselves. They help to put us in our place, not in any sense of subjugation, but to help us realize our position in the grand process. We are planetary children yet, but we are, to a considerable extent, self-determined. We can make choices. Within fairly close limits, we have freedom of action. We can, so to say, act in harmony with the law or go against it in what we do. We can create storms in our affairs by way of discord, and we do, and the law, ever working, has to resolve them, to restore the equilibrium. But it works in its own time. As we have mentioned, as units in humanity, each of us has a very special position in the planetary process. Our world is designed to provide a home for us, to bring us into being, to nurture and educate us, so that we may eventually be incorporated as conscious partners into the overall scheme of things. Our destiny thereafter is to help raise another human family on another globe, and so the great wheel turns. While we may regard the earth literally as humanity's mother, we have to acknowledge life itself as our father. For us, he is represented by the life of the sun. But that's another mystery, not yet for our apprehension or comprehension. So now we find ourselves, so to speak, on the stage of being. We too, severally and collectively, are ever becoming, each with virtually an endless past and virtually an endless future. Our humanity is, however, our Earth's family, if she is our mother. Some of us, as egos, as we have seen, are older children, some are younger, as would be the case in any family. But we are nevertheless brothers and sisters of one family, humanity. And this is the inescapable truth of the universal brotherhood of humanity. We are it. The real realization of this fact is the end result of all really ethical and esoteric teaching. The consequences of such a realization, if it could be made general, or if only a significant minority, let alone majority of people, could be brought to realize it, would be incalculable for the welfare of the human family and the planet. At the inception of the modern Theosophical Society, it was hoped, nay, intended, that it should constitute in itself a nucleus of this de facto brotherhood, and that from it the brotherhood idea could radiate. That is the Society's prime task. Another declared task is to educate its members so that they might understand the processes involved in bringing up a human family such as that to which we globally belong. In the cassettes we have covered, albeit in outline only, the scope of the subject matter of esoteric science as a teaching. We have established some data, which perhaps can, for the time being, be regarded as only as postulate. But let us review it. First, we tried to find some framework in which to present our enormous subject, so as to get a preliminary perspective view. Then we looked at some ideas on the constitution of man and cosmos. We saw that cosmos comprises hierarchies, each composed of innumerable beings such that in aggregate they are cosmos. There is nothing else. The collective whole is a living unity, a unit of life, manifesting in the infinite diversity of the lives composing it. There is one life and one law inherent in it, which operates unerringly, inescapably, and inexorably. Every process in cosmos subserves its overall purposes. These, as far as we are concerned, are those of evolution, the unfoldment of all the potentialities latent or partially developed in all of us. It is our long-term dharma to bring forth and foster the growth of our proper human faculties. Humanity as a whole is a creative hierarchy within the great scheme of things which must fulfill its destiny if the cosmic program is itself to be fulfilled. Humanity can only achieve its goal by each of us achieving ours individually. And this is our responsibility. And it, like the law, is inescapable sooner or later. We can't prevent the grand consummation of this phase of the life of cosmos. We can, however, delay it, though to our cost. We are so used to regarding ourselves as separate beings with separate interests, concerns, duties, etc., that it's very difficult for us to realize ourselves as essential units within the universal life, whose progress depends on our progress. One of the linchpins of occult training, which includes spiritual development, is duty. It is our duty to progress. But our first duty is to the people and organizations, families, groups, employers, nations, to which karma has attached us. Notice what we are saying here. The motive for progress is outside ourselves as persons. In this view, we do not aspire to know God, to be enlightened, or to meet a master, or even be noticed by one, for ourselves. Instead, we learn what our duty is and do it with all our might. We want no favors from life, we make no demands, seek no rewards, we don't even look for help. So does esoteric science change our attitudes. In several places, HPB has told us that the very nature of the science is altruism, self-forgetfulness in duty, or, as it is more often called, service. In the light of our knowledge of the science, even so far, we can see why these words, which must appear very stark and very uninviting to a beginner, are, in essence, necessarily true. If we really aspire to spiritual development for the right motive, and we do this as part of the process of our growth, we have to discover the way. In this we are, of course, given much instruction, but all such instruction is on the same lines. If we are all at all personally or self-interested, our attention is orientated in the wrong direction, downwards instead of upwards. We are looking the wrong way. This is obviously a formidable barrier. Duty is a high motive. It's the highest. It must combine not only with altruism, but also with compassion. As we study occultism and try to discover what it really is, we have insights. These become so real as to affect not only our thinking, but our behavior, our actions. One such insight we can have is that whereas we may subscribe to the idea of duty, we may find it very difficult in specific terms to know where our duty lies. For example, in wartime, a choice may have to be made between one's family's and one's country's best interests. A member of our family may be held hostage, and the price of his or her freedom might be important secret information. Would or should we pay it? In many such cases, we don't have the wisdom, the overall knowledge to make a right choice. In any case, how many of us are or would be really motivated in such a case purely by duty? So, we can ask, how can a knowledge of esotericism help? It can help in showing us the big picture. It can help in showing us something of our part as a member of the human family in the unfolding life drama on our planet. It can help us to understand the processes of growth, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, that are the real reasons for our being here. Our vision is extended to beyond our immediate self-interests and our local environment, our habitual thinking patterns. We see things in a bigger perspective. Further, in that we can, by its aid, understand something of what is involved in the processes of internal growth, we can take an intelligent interest in our own development. And we can know why, for example, certain disciplines and efforts on our part become necessary. What then is spiritual development? We saw in Cassette 10 that spirit is ultimately monad, universal life, the self behind all selves, at whatever level they may manifest. In man, monad, Atma Buddhi, reflected into manas, constitutes man's individual self. This self, however, through Atma, is itself inseverable from the one life. Buddhi is also co-equal with Atma, being Atma's vehicle, through which only it can be effective, if such an expression is meaningful, during Manvantara. Now, the point of these two statements is that if monad is spirit itself, and as such cannot be said to be susceptible of development, what does spiritual development mean? It means the creation and slow development of the vehicles through which monad may express one after the other the aspects of its potential faculties, which must remain latent within spirit until these vehicles, each with its particular characteristics, are developed. One of the marvels of this process is that the vehicles, so to speak, are themselves living organisms made up of living atoms of life, and each atom itself also expressing something of monad. All is monad, expressing itself in the myriad ways and lives of cosmos. This process is not only exemplified in the great life waves which we appreciate as the kingdoms of nature, but in the sensibilities, the senses, the abilities, the sentiency, the various kinds of feeling, the mental processes, and ultimately consciousness itself, of all the life and lives constituting cosmos. Faculties are, so to speak, the dynamic aspects, the ways of operation of life, and the organisms, organs, life forms at all levels make their functioning possible. Every faculty, like spirit or life force, has to have a vehicle for its expression. It's difficult to find an adequate means to describe the mental comprehension by way of direct insight of this superb, infinitely complex process. The very appreciation is part of the process. The very ability to perceive is itself a faculty which has to be developed. And this is an example of the way that understanding grows. Spiritual development is the process by which we attune ourselves to the higher octaves of sentiency and comprehension. In human beings, this means improving the responsiveness of the higher mental faculties. When we were dealing in Cassette 2 with the constitution of man, in terms of his 7 principles reflecting those of cosmos, we saw that these 7 principles each comprised 7 sub-principles, each of which in turn reflected the characteristics of the main principles. For example, if we take our 4th principle, karma, K-A-M-A, it will have sub-principles corresponding to the following: physical, stula sharira; astral, linga sharira; prana, kama, manas, lower and higher, and buddhi and atman. These will be, so to speak, harmonics of the fundamental note of the main karma principle. Now we must understand this scale of things in terms of correspondences. For example, Prakriti is a name given to our physical level of objective being when we are considering the main principles of man, and it is the lowest of the cosmic sub-principles. The Prakriti aspect of, for example, the karmic plane in us would mean its most material aspect. This, however, must not be taken to mean that karma as such could have a gross physical body, but it has a form aspect, perceivable by a clairvoyant whose faculties are developed to see at that level. We've just seen that corresponding to each vehicle developed for the expression of a particular aspect of life activity is a dynamic aspect in terms of operating faculty. It can manifest physically in movement, typical of whatever is moving, such as a fish or ant or a bird or a monkey, each with its characteristic modes of motion, or it can manifest internally as feeling, thinking, consciousness, etc. And all of these have numerous modes. There's a different kind of typical consciousness for each cosmic plane, human plane or subplane. We don't know anything about consciousness on the cosmic planes as such. Some of our higher initiates know by reflection the lower harmonics of cosmic consciousness. We know them only insofar as we can respond to their harmonics, so to speak, at our level. If we apply what we've been told about mind, we see first that, like our karma principle, it can operate on 7 levels. The first 3 are those of lower mind, so-called. The higher 3 are those of higher mind. The middle or karmic level is a midpoint, and midpoints in our septenary system are always balance points, like globe D of our chain between the descending and the ascending globes. In general, the subplanes of higher mind, corresponding to Atma, Buddhi, and Manas, are orientated towards the Buddhic main principle, whereas the lower mind subplanes are orientated towards the lower triad, that is, the physical body, the astral body, and prana. And just as Buddhi has a characteristic consciousness, so have our bodies and our second and third principles. There is, as said, a mode of consciousness for each plane or subplane. The midpoint, the balance point of the mental plane, is known as antakarana. Mind, looking so to speak downwards from this point, is the personal mind, concerned with all personal interests, which, in the main, are essentially selfish. These concerns are also mostly our habitual ones. They occupy our attention, most of our waking time. Most of our internal activity and interest is karma manasic, where mind subserves our desires. Upwards from antakarana, the mind looks, so to speak, into the spiritual realms of Buddhi and Atma. Here, consciousness is that of the ego, the divine incarnating individuality of man, his self, whose consciousness is spiritual and free, as opposed to personal consciousness, which is limited by the passions and confining interests of the ordinary man. About antakarana, HPP says, the occultists explain it as the path or bridge between the higher and lower manas, the divine ego and the personal soul of man. It serves as a medium of communication between the two and conveys from the lower to the higher ego all those personal impressions and thoughts of men which can, by their nature, be assimilated and stored by the undying entity and be thus made immortal with it. These being the only elements of the evanescent personality that survive death and time. It thus stands to reason that only that which is noble, spiritual, and divine in man can testify in eternity to his having lived. That's from the Theosophical Glossary. By a like token, however, as antakarana is developed, and it is said that we, by our living effort, have to make it effective as a bridge, it allows consciousness to use higher mind levels. As this happens, we begin to know at first hand something of egoic consciousness. When higher mind begins to function, we are that much more susceptible to egoic promptings by way of conscience and intuition in our ordinary living. We begin to be motivated directly by virtue. We then know the difference between right and wrong for ourselves. We need no longer the guidance of precept. We now have understanding, and insofar as we express it in life, we are wise. There are many ramifications of this breakthrough in consciousness into the spiritual realms, but to express them, in a sense, belittles them. For those of us, however, who are not yet mature enough to be really motivated by duty, and this is the case for most of us, the concept, the mere idea of this sublime, liberated consciousness can inspire us. It arouses aspiration and devotion. And these stem from the higher aspects of our karma principle. And as karma does generally, it moves us to action. We begin to want to experience what we sense somehow, that we innately possess our higher faculties, so that eventually we may enjoy communion with our own inner divinity. The means of training for and attaining this is the province of our mystical, truly religious teachers. The greatest of such teachers have left us priceless treasures of instruction to meet all our needs all the way from start to finish. Among the great classics that sooner or later come to the notice of genuinely aspiring students are the Bhagavad Gita, Light on the Path, The Voice of the Silence, and the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. These can be read at various levels, and it's likely that beginners would not appreciate their full value. Certain other books, such as Edwin Arnold's The Light of Asia, might have a more direct, immediate appeal and stimulate some people, leading them on to deeper insights. There's a veritable mass of literature about the spiritual journey to suit students and aspirants of all natures, racial background, upbringing, and education. Spiritual progress, however, cannot be hurried. It takes time, like any other natural growth, but it can be helped along by the right treatment. HPB says in The Key, Chapter 2, after having explained that a member of the Theosophical Society may not necessarily be a Theosophist de facto, the Society, she says, cannot make a Theosophist of one who has no sense of the divine fitness of things. And importantly, she adds, or of him who understands Theosophy in his own, if the expression may be used, sectarian and egotistic way. In this quotation, as in many others that we have used, Theosophy is synonymous with esoteric science. A sense of the divine fitness of things implies a degree of inner maturity without which spiritual instruction could not properly be received. Such instruction might be strong meat, not for babes and sucklings as mentioned in the Bible. Anyone who understands Theosophy in his own sectarian and egotistic way would also not be ready. His mind would be conditioned, probably to a set of beliefs. Further, if he saw things in an egotistical way, his lower mind would be too dominant. As we have seen, the personal mind is orientated the wrong way. It is that mind which values opinions and beliefs. It mistakes these for knowledge, whereas they are in fact only mind constructions, concepts, which imprison us to the extent that we value them or feel them to be sacred and want to keep them. Sometimes this latter wanting is a result of loyalty to our ideas and maybe to their source. We are then really trapped. We can only know things spiritual with the higher mind when Antakarana is functioning. The main task for us is to build that bridge. Our urge and spur for this is in higher desire, the feelings we have when the monastic, Buddhic, and even atmic sub-levels of our karma principle, the fourth, are coming alive and starting to impress our consciousness. The monastic sub-level starts to liberate our desires from their habitual lower trends. It reflects into manners proper and tends to make us review the tenor of our lives. The Buddhic subplane arouses our higher feelings. We begin to sense sympathy for others, to appreciate something of the fact that we all share the same world, feel the same things, are hurt by the same things. We begin to want to understand more and more. We begin to feel our sense of inadequacy, for example, to help effectively in cases of suffering. The atmic subplane of karma reflects something of spirit proper, the universal life principle. And insofar as we respond to that, we sense its power. We feel more strongly, and because of its association with Buddhi, even at its karmic level, we feel not only more strongly, but more benignly, more compassionately. We begin to feel that in some way we can and ought to help along life's progress, however small our contribution might be. These feelings, our sympathy, our understanding, our wish to help, are all directed outwards, away from our personal selves. The orientation of attention outwards and upwards is the beginning of conscious development. Our natures are growing. We are maturing. We are beginning practically to know the meaning of altruism. We now begin to wonder, what can we do about it? We are now ready, consciously, to make some effort in spiritual development. From here on, when we read our books of instruction, we sense their value. We make a few tentative and spasmodic tries at doing what they tell us to do, or what we feel we should do. With a little effort, our attempts, however spasmodic and tentative, lead to some development. Slow and imperceptible though it may be, it is cumulative. We may or may not have some encouraging experiences, but we are on our way, on the long, long way home whence we came. So far, we have not mentioned the subject of meditation, which should surely have some part in spiritual development. But what do we mean by meditation? The word has many meanings, and these differ according to system, school, or sect. We have referred to the classical Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. These set out a system not only of meditative practice, but a way of life, a controlled way of life, harmonious with the law, with our environment and all in it, and particularly our fellow human travelers. As we have seen, this is an essential element in meditation. The two constitute, when seen against the occult philosophy, what is often known as Raja Yoga. HBB, talking of the knowledge and practice of the truly spiritual life, says that Atma Vidya, a term which is translated simply knowledge of the soul, true wisdom by the Orientalists, means far more than that. She says that it is the only kind of occultism that any Theosophist who admires light on the path and who would be wise and unselfish ought to strive after. All the other occult arts may be mastered and results obtained, whether good, bad, or indifferent, but Atma Vidya sets small value on them. It includes them all and may even use them occasionally, but it does so after purifying them of their dross for beneficent purposes and taking care to deprive them of every element of selfish motive. That's from Collected Writings, Volume 9, 249. Now this puts meditation into its proper setting. Esoterically, meditation is the means of purifying the mind, the lower mind, and hence of purifying the emotions, then of learning to control it so as to prevent its purely automatic functioning, its habitual constant movement arising from within itself or as reaction to outside or emotional stimuli. As we said above, we have to create the bridge of antakarana, to have any conscious cognizance of our higher mind promptings and content. The creation of this bridge is our way into another world, another order of being, the world of spiritual divine consciousness. Ultimately, this is the world of omniscience, omnipotence, and ubiquity, a far remove from our limited personal mind consciousness. Meditation, however, is the way there. We can't enlarge here on the various meditational practices nor their merits, but to be effective, they must have three elements: to quieten or still our restive lower mind, to control that mind so that we can apply it, in the end, undeviatingly, to what we want, and thirdly, to raise our consciousness. Now, this last can be done in many ways. For example, by dwelling on the inspirational sayings of the great ones, by reading liberating literature, particularly on the nature of the One, that thou art. Music can play a part, sometimes significant, according to the music and our power to respond. Nevertheless, as we say elsewhere, one can't make a theosophist out of one who has no sense of the divine fitness of things. This means much: an open mind, a willingness to learn, the inner strength to persevere, a capacity for wonder and devotion, and a reverence for all that is, as a living part of the universal living whole. This is the end of the first side of cassette 12. Please run the tape on to the end and turn the cassette over. Cassette 12, second side. Spiritual development. On the first side of this cassette, we gave something of the rationale of spiritual development and mentioned some of the signs by which we could recognize in ourselves progress on the way, or, for the very beginner, the things which indicate a readiness to start. Without this readiness to start, volumes of instruction mean nothing. When we are truly ready, we are susceptible to inspiration. We sense moving significance in what we read, provided that our books are worthy ones. Those mentioned on the first side of this cassette have stood the test of time, and generations of aspirants have used and still use them profitably. This alone testifies to their value. We said that spiritual development was the ultimate purpose of the grand cosmic process. It is essentially what the cosmos is doing, eternally. But the action is by and in its countless myriads of living units, each at its own level. Progress, cosmically, is the collective aggregate of the individual progress. Humanity is itself a collective unit, and its progress depends entirely on that made by each of its members. That means, to lend point to this instruction, the progress made by each one of us, to whom the instruction is addressed. We have seen something of the depth and extent, the beauty and the power of the majestic cosmic process in all its various aspects. In having regard to the content of the previous cassettes, based on so much of the information as has been so far given out to humanity, the picture that emerges is stupendous indeed. And we must remember that, even so, we have got little more than a fragmentary outline of the totality of the real picture. What we have got so far lacks the infinity of significant detail and colour, and the many aspects of it of which we have no inkling, that in fact there must be in the complete work. Spiritual development is the development of the faculties necessary to give expression to the powers and qualities of spirit. These faculties include those of comprehension and apprehension. An essential part of the process for the disciple is learning. This is a twofold process. First, the acquiring of information by study, and secondly, the development of faculty in practice by self-directed action. Talking about gaining an understanding of the stages by way of chains and globes, etc., of planetary development, a master said, "Lead the life necessary for the acquisition of such knowledge, and powers and wisdom will come to you naturally." That's from the first volume of The Secret Doctrine, page 167. Then followed some figuratively mystical instruction that perhaps at our stage might not have much meaning for most of us. The point made, however, was our leading the life necessary. This injunction runs through all spiritual instruction. It's fairly obvious that this is the only way to learn in any meaningful sense. Learning the theory intellectually may help us not only to a mental understanding of the inner processes of nature, but to an appreciation of the feasibility of spiritual progress as a natural growth one, and that it is for us to foster it in specific ways in ourselves. We will not, however, know for ourselves what it is really all about unless we try it. Our capacity for insight and understanding grow by themselves against a background of effort and experience, but exceedingly slowly. Their growth can be hastened, we are told, that perseverance provides the soil in which they grow. Spiritual progress is often likened to a journey of difficulty, with many hazards on the way. We must nevertheless forget that most of the obstacles and diversions on the way are not so much in the way itself as in ourselves, our weaknesses, our fears, our little prides. Always there is the goal ahead, the castle, the prince or princess, the grail, the great light. Always there are signposts, and those who point the way, stage by stage. But first, there must be a start. We have to find out that there is a journey. Our curiosity must be aroused. We must be given some clues, some information, a prospect, at least an imagined one, that we must recognize and respond to. Here, as an example, is some initial guidance. That which is neither spirit nor matter, nor light nor darkness, but is verily the container and root of these, that thou art. The root projects at every dawn its shadow on itself, and that thou callest light and life, O poor dead form. This life-light streameth downward through the stairway of 7 worlds, the stairs of which each step becomes denser and darker. It is of this 7 times 7 scale that thou art the climber and mirror, O little man. Thou art this, but thou knowest it not. This is the first lesson to learn. The second is to study well the principles of both cosmos and ourselves, dividing them into the permanent and impermanent, the higher and immortal and the lower and mortal. For thus only can we master and guide first the lower cosmic and personal, and then the higher cosmic and impersonal. That's from Secret Doctrine, Vol. 3, page 513. This extract is perhaps somewhat mystical, and as instruction, indirect, even obscure, but it is written against the background of at least an intellectual understanding of the 7 times 7-fold structure of cosmos and its correspondences in man. It's based on the great axiomatic truth that the only eternal and living reality is that which the Hindus call Paramatma and Parabrahman. This is the one ever-existing root essence, immutable and unknowable to our physical senses, but manifest and clearly perceptible to our spiritual natures. Once imbued with that basic idea and the further conception that if it is omniscient, universal, and eternal, like abstract space itself, we must have emanated from it, and we must someday return into it, and all the rest becomes easy. That's from Secret Doctrine, 3rd volume, page 5112. If the significance of the foregoing can be perceived, it becomes a powerful quickener of interior insight and aspiration. For most, however, it will remain at least, for some time, an intellection, to coin a word. And here is something the would-be spiritual climber should bear in mind. Quoting, "A high development of the intellectual faculties does not imply spiritual and true life. The presence in one of a highly developed human intellectual soul, the 5th principle, or manas, is quite compatible with the absence of buddhi, or the spiritual soul. Unless the former evolves from and develops under the beneficent and vivifying rays of the latter, it will remain forever but a direct progeny of the terrestrial lower principles, sterile in spiritual perceptions, a magnificent, luxurious sepulchre, full of the dry bones of decaying matter within." This is a clear warning to the aspirant that book learning and rational thinking in themselves do not lead to spirituality. There are even warnings that, unless balanced by proper feeling, they can obscure the light of true perception. H.P.B's book of guidance to the aspirant after spiritual development is The Voice of the Silence. In this book, much is said about the difference between head learning and heart learning, or the doctrine of the eye, as opposed to the doctrine of the heart. This difference between the head or eye and the heart doctrines is one too often forgotten, especially by the student, who feels he must be doing something to acquire wisdom. He reads and reads, and instead of his life being full of right activity and right relationships, it is one of ever-accumulating ideas, which, when he gives them verbal expression, can present a front of wisdom to the world. HPB says the lower terrestrial vehicles can, albeit, remain a luxurious sepulchre full of the dry bones of learning. The esoteric constitution of man emphasizes, as has been said many times, the distinction between the personality and the individuality. This is a key factor in helping us to discover what is permanent as against what is impermanent in ordinary life, an essential preliminary to spiritual development. In short, nothing that develops the personality as such leads to spirituality. It's the purification of the personality, especially the lower mind, that must precede and then accompany spiritual progress. We have made the point about the importance of the orientation of attention upwards towards buddhi, rather than downwards towards karma in spiritual training. To start with, this can be done only occasionally and fitfully. Insofar, however, as attention is withdrawn from our karmic natures, the process of purification is started. With the infinity of sense attractions at physical level and emotional attraction at psychic levels, our karma monastic principle clamours for notice virtually all the time. In fact, our thoughts are centred there most of our waking time. A continuous conscious effort of withdrawal is needed until some sustained freedom from it is achieved. Now, this freedom manifests as very welcome peace of mind, which, however, has continually to be guarded. It is altogether too easy to slide imperceptibly into our old familiar habits of thinking, worrying, desiring, and the need for emotional stimulation. This latter can be very reassuring and provides a content to life which some find hard to forego. They will even argue that it is wrong to sever our relationships. There is, however, no question of severing relationships. What could be more spiritual than the giving of love and the concern for others? What must be learned is not to expect or even want love and concern for ourselves in return. Self-forgetfulness must apply even in this. HPB wrote a particularly helpful article on spiritual progress in the Theosophist for May 1885, which is quoted in Collected Writings, Vol. 6, page 331, where she lays stress on a number of points. One is the necessity for sustained, unremitting effort all the way. Another is the subjugation of the lower nature by the higher, a large part of which process is the reorientation of habitual attention from the lower to the higher aspects of our natures. As an adjunct to this, she mentions the recasting of our values. The main cause of pain, she says, lies in our perpetually seeking the permanent in the impermanent, and not only seeking, but acting as if we had already found the unchangeable in a world of which the one certain quality we can predict is constant change. The article explains that the changing of ourselves and the concomitant internal disruption also involves pain. Our experiences tend to become seemingly unbearably painful as we progress. largely because of the diverse elements of our natures, some being well developed, others weak. And she says, evil is often the result of over-anxiety, and men are always trying to do too much. They are not content to leave well alone, to do always just what the occasion demands and no more. They exaggerate every action and so produce karma to be worked out in a future birth. Another form of evil is the hope or desire of reward. As she says, leaving open the door to anxiety, doubt, fear, despondency, and failure. Still quoting, the goal for the aspirant for spiritual wisdom is entrance upon a higher plane of existence. He is to become a new man, more perfect in every way than he is at present. And if he succeeds, his capabilities and faculties will receive a corresponding increase of range and power. Just as in the visible world we find that each stage in the evolutionary scale is marked by an increase in capacity. This is how it is that the adept becomes endowed with marvelous powers that have so often been described. But the main point to be remembered is that these powers are natural accompaniments of existence on a higher plane of evolution, just as the ordinary human faculties are the natural accompaniments of existence on the ordinary human plane. That's from Collected Writings, Vol. 6, page 332 and 3. The latter part of the extract is more of incidental interest than of immediate value to the early aspirant. He needs guidance suitable to his tyro stage. Nevertheless, it sows significant seeds. It is preparing thinking for a move out of the accustomed, well-worn ways. The ideas of a higher plane, of increased capacity, of marvelous powers, of those who have possessed themselves of such powers. All these, to the man still virtually totally involved at personal level, are new and perhaps strange to the point of fantasy. However, as study progresses, they become more feasible and eventually accepted as the order of things. The tyro, the curious novice exploring the literature for answers to the questions that so many ask, but to which so very few know any answers, becomes slowly the neophyte. He has found his way into a stream or current of thought, and if he's lucky, a circle of acquaintances where, although he may be only the veriest beginner, he finds that he belongs. He can see a vista ahead, and this vista becomes more and more attractive as it opens up. Now here comes a paradox. While the vista becomes increasingly attractive, the way ahead appears increasingly daunting. The pilgrim begins to see his role in very unfamiliar terms. He does not see every prospect of the picture to start with. They come to view, so to speak, as he rounds bends or tops hills. At the outset, he's concerned with himself in the adventure, with his progress, his overcoming of obstacles, his increase in knowledge and insight. Slowly, however, he becomes more interested in the view. He becomes conscious of the other pilgrims on the same journey. He still sees it all in relation to himself. What does the view mean to him? Do his fellow travellers help or hinder him? Gradually, his interest shifts. It's not so much he himself in the view and his relation to the other travellers that interests him. It's the view itself, with all its amazing variety of content and the consciousness of all his companions on the way that absorb his interest. The whole scene has more and more significance for him, more meaning, as it reveals itself to his developing perception. He begins to sense his inseverable links with it in all its immense variety. He identifies with it. He now sees the journey as a common road for all, not only with his fellow men on it, but with all things in nature. In the terms we used before, he sees a universal becoming, ever becoming, an everlasting trend to fulfillment against the background of a multitudinous coming and going of everything great and small. He sees the whole vast, all-embracing process as the activity of the one life, all according to the pattern of the one harmonizing law. He learns that the rhythms of his life and of his many successive lives are an integral part of this vast, ever-unfolding picture. So, self-forgetfulness is born. His function, nay, his only desire now, is to help this seemingly interminable, purposive procession on to its appointed but ever-receding fulfillment. What that might be in mind terms, he will not be able to say, but he nevertheless senses the onward, eternal, progressive march. This vision is not sustained, and there are many lapses into self-concern, and perhaps even despondency at his inadequacy to live up to what he now knows his part to be in the great work of nature. His path often becomes obscured. His attention is too easily diverted by some close-at-hand distraction, attraction, or obstacle. All the time he has himself, his lifelong thought habits, his desires, his weaknesses to contend with. These are all difficulties enough, but they can become almost insurmountable when, more often than not, the handicaps of karma, of circumstances, job, family, etc., are superimposed onto his personal defects and deficiencies. In moments of lucidity, however, our pilgrim sees all this in the context of his spiritual journey. These are the really formidable tasks and tests he must face. They will not go away, but coupled with his ability, even though fitfully, to see his way, he knows for a certainty that within himself are all the resources of strength and guidance that he could possibly need. He learns to have faith in that knowledge, and also to practice patience. He has many lives ahead, but he also knows that, as far as he can possibly make it, his effort has to be unremitting. All this he learns as he goes, however slowly. It's not the intention of this cassette to reiterate the instruction for the would-be student of occultism given in the books referred to on the first side of this cassette, but to review, necessarily very sketchily, the practical start and the signs of progress. One aspect of the instruction, which has the effect of reorientating attention from our lower imperfect selves to those aspects of true spirituality, the more readily available to the ordinary learner, is the injunction to live in the eternal. It is fairly obvious that most of us spend most of our mental time, whenever our attention is not given to a specific task or problem, reviewing the past or in anticipating the future, in all sorts of ways. The past contains our regrets, recriminations, guilt, spoilt relationships, humiliations, remorse, failures, as well as our successes, our joys and happiness, and the positive aspects of our experience. All this makes up, in total, what we feel very largely to be ourselves. Our behavior in particular circumstances is conditioned by this accumulation of experience, which almost unconsciously becomes an assessment of our character and abilities. Past and future are effectively extensions, either way, of this current view of ourselves. In it, we as personalities are virtually present-time prisoners. Now the wise tell us we need not be. Live in the eternal, they say. This is the present moment of our being. It is the only time we are. It is the time of our being. We cannot be, as at this moment, 1 minute ago or 1 minute hence. When a minute, a month, or a year has gone by, we shall still only have our being in the instant of that now. The now, for example, of your hearing these words. This is the only time when we can do anything, whether it be reading, thinking, writing, working, or resting. We are enjoined to collect all our attention into this moment, to get free of our psychological luggage from the past and from our hopes, maybe our fears for the future. The doing of this, the actual doing, brings an enormous sense of relief and peace. Some people resist even the attempt to do this because they feel they will be parting with their memories. They will, in fact, lose no memory. They can always review consciously any incident in the past when they like, instead of being attached to it subconsciously day in and day out. Some also object that in our present world they must think about and plan for the future, even if it is just to do the shopping for daily needs. Well, this is common prudence, and it has nothing to do with the attitude of mind of living in the now. Even shopping can be done with present-time consciousness, and in fact should be so done, as should all our living activity. The effects of maintaining of mindfulness, as the Buddha called it, in this way, are many, but particularly is awareness enhanced and experience enriched. Slowly our conditioning is transcended. We become inwardly free, and our approach to life becomes much less fearful. Our limitations cease to be of conscious concern. The world becomes a kindlier place. The effects of this living in the eternal now are an example of the results of spiritual training. They have the effect of liberating us in consciousness from the almost exclusive involvement in our little selves. We begin to live in the freer atmosphere of impersonality, and impersonality is the hallmark of spirituality. What is happening to us in this change, and what is it that motivates the process? It is obviously not in line with the direct interests of the personality. There are many explanations of this in the literature, but here is one that puts the process in the context of our planetary evolution and the origins of man. Talking of the implanting of mind into the human forms built round the model provided by the lunar Petries, the passage says, it explains the mystery of and fills the gap between the informing principle in man, the higher self, or human monad, and the animal monad, both one and the same, although the former is endowed with divine intelligence and the latter with instinctual faculty alone. How is the difference to be explained, and the presence of that higher self in man accounted for? Says the commentary, the sons of Mahat are the quickeners of the human plant. They are the waters falling upon the arid soil of latent life, and the spark that vivifies the human animal. They are the lords of spiritual life eternal. Not all men become incarnations of the divine rebels, but only a few among them. The remainder had their fifth principle simply quickened by the spark thrown into it, which accounts for the great difference between the intellectual capacities of men and races. Had not the sons of Mahat, speaking allegorically, skipped the intermediate worlds in their impulse towards intellectual freedom, the animal man would never have been able to reach upwards from this earth and attain, through self-exertion, his ultimate goal. The cyclic pilgrimage would have had to be performed through all the planes of existence, half unconsciously, if not entirely so, as in the case of animals. It is owing to this rebellion of intellectual life against the morbid inactivity of pure spirit that we are what we are, self-conscious, thinking men with capabilities and attributes of gods in us, for good as much as for evil. Hence the rebels are our saviours. It is only by the attractive force of the contrasts that the two opposites, spirit and matter, can be cemented together on earth, and smelted in the fire of self-conscious experience and suffering, find themselves wedded in eternity. This will reveal the meaning of many hitherto incomprehensible allegories, foolishly called fables. That's from second volume of the SD, page 102. The cementing together of the higher and lower elements of a man's being is the technique of real spiritual fulfillment. It is, as we have seen, a long process of purification of the lower man in all respects, but most importantly, emotionally and mentally. The development of strength of purpose or will, and of altruism, and the highest sense of duty. Apart from aiding the achievement of our spiritual aims, this matter of purity of life has beneficial effects at physical level. Here's a quotation. Theosophy has to inculcate ethics. It has to purify the soul if it would relieve the physical body, whose ailments, save cases of accidents, are all hereditary. The latter part of this statement is hard to reconcile with our view that disease is a matter of germs, but a constitution, robust and naturally healthy, is not susceptible to the attacks of germs. Our constitutions have been undermined by generations of impure living. But this is by the way. Returning to our theme and the remainder of the paragraph, it is not by studying occultism for selfish ends, for the gratification of one's personal ambition or pride or even vanity, that one can ever reach the true goal, that of helping suffering mankind. Nor is it by studying one single branch of the esoteric philosophy that a man becomes an occultist, but by studying, if not mastering, them all. That's from the Key, chapter 2. Now this extract raises a point seldom even thought about, let alone discussed. It is the distinction between mysticism and occultism, in the context of spiritual development. It is normally taken that the mystical experience of union with divinity is the acme, the end of all spiritual development. But from the point of view of the occultist, this is an experience he will enjoy along the way. With it may come the acquisition of powers, for example of clairvoyance, or a control over the elementals, of a kind which a number of Eastern gurus can demonstrate and thereby attract a large following. Such mystics have, to a more or less extent, purified their lower vehicles. They have, and maybe do, certainly enjoy God or Buddhic consciousness. This manifests as their own feeling of and insistence on love. But their powers are accidental possessions. They could not, in most cases at any rate, explain them. The occultist, however, is learning to become a master of nature, of her elements and forces throughout their whole gamut. He knows the processes and laws by which they work. He knows their qualities and the part they play in the total economy. By his developed will and the powers inherent and developed in himself, he has sovereignty over them, consciously. He has learned fully to cooperate with nature as a beneficent, selfless, divine power, furthering the cause of universal evolution, usually with a special care for struggling humanity. Even such an exalted one, however, cannot help struggling humanity beyond the bounds of karma. This explains the extreme rarity of their direct interference in human affairs. They must work through their agents, their pupils and disciples, whose karma it is still to live and work in the world. This is an incomplete and imperfect essay on spiritual development. There is, for example, no way of describing verbally the experience of impersonality, which, as we have seen, is the hallmark of real spirituality. It can't even be imagined in terms of personal experience. It is liberation, total liberation, at least temporarily to begin with, from the confines of personal thinking and feeling. It has been described as an entering into the void. But it is fullness, not emptiness. The content is life, often associated in consciousness with light. This is the mystical experience, and it has many repercussions on the personal man. He can never be the same again after he has had it. He can never again really re-enter the shell of personal concern. Having briefly surveyed the field of spiritual development, we should perhaps finish on a note of instruction as to how to proceed on this journey of self-initiated, self-sustained, and essentially self-discovered and self-taught endeavor, to the ultimate end of merging our then purified and fully developed little self with the universal self, via our own individual divine self in full consciousness. There have been a number of such epitomes of instruction for the earnest student and aspirant. Here is one, however, from W.Q. Judge, a known pupil of one of the masters for a number of years. He's answering a question from a student as to how to proceed. You say that for 3 years you have been endeavoring to study theosophy. Such being the case, you will meet with but little success. Divine wisdom cannot be a subject for study, but may be the object of search. With the love for this same wisdom uppermost in our hearts, we ask you if it would not be wiser to lay aside the study of so-called theosophy and study yourself. Knowing yourself, you know all men, the worlds seen and occult, and find Theosophia. One cannot absorb theosophy as a sponge absorbs water to be expelled at the slightest touch. Our conception of theosophy is apt to be based upon the idea that it is an especial line of teaching, a larger, wider, greater doctrine than others, perhaps, but still a doctrine, and therefore limited. We must bear in mind that the true theosophist belongs to no cult or sect, yet belongs to each and all, that he can find the true object of his search equally well in the Hebrew Bible as in the Yoga philosophy, in the New Testament as in the Bhagavad Gita. You say you have conned the Yoga philosophy. This is not enough. Merely to con it is not to know it. It is in fact a most practical system, if you prefer, to that of Patanjali, and one that will meet all the requirements you have in the way of difficulty, for it is one of the most difficult. It's not possible for you to judge its merits without practice, and it gives you full directions. If for 3 years you study and practice it, aye, for 1 year, you will find that you need no other. In these matters there is no child's play, nor the usual English and American method of mere book learning. And we must absorb and work into the practice and theory laid down, for they are not written merely for the intellect, but for the whole spiritual nature. There must be within man something which he already knows, that leaps up and out when he scans the books of wisdom, a thing already existing, which only takes an added life or confirmation from books. True theosophy has all that is practical, but many forget this. There is no greater system of practice than that required by it. Desire wisdom, love all men, do your duty, forget yourself. Let each thought and act of your life have for its aim the finding of divine wisdom. Strive to apply that wisdom for the good of other men. If you search in every direction, light must come to you. Let the place in which you now are be the lonely room you speak of, and seek to find in everything the meaning. Strive to know what they are, and by what governed and caused. This is the first step. Live your life with this ever before you. Purify your thought as well as your body. Reason all you can. Feel with all your heart. And when intellect and heart fail you, seek for something higher. This is the ABC. It is enough for the present. That's from Echoes of the Orient, Vol. 2, page 382. And that's the end of cassette 12.